It is June the 1st, depending on when you're watching. This is an incredibly important month for Josh Heupel. I could make a strong argument that he would rather win June than beat Alabama or beat Georgia this upcoming season. Not saying I'd go that direction, but I could make the strong argument because you have a program right now that's dependent on two things. Well, a lot of things, but personnel wise, two things. One is some of Jeremy Pruitt's players, prospects that are going to move on. The other is the transfer portal. Is that sustainable? Honestly, I don't know. I don't think it is, but I'm not sure. We are in a totally new age. It would be like me saying that quantum physics doesn't exist. I don't know. I don't know. Maybe it is sustainable. Maybe you get 5 or 6 key transfers every single year, but I think you'd rather do it the Alabama way where you bring guys up. I think you also, Alabama's perfect. They needed a running back. They got Jahmyr Gibbs. They're bringing guys up through the program and they keep that culture. I have real concern after the guys that, I've gotten to know, in particular Jacob and Cooper, but there are other leaders in this program. Milton would be one. Hooker would have been one as well. And I could go on and on and on. Trey Flowers is one. I've concern for Tennessee and Tennessee fans what happens when these guys move on because they were brought up through the program. They seen the hard times and they wanted to take advantage of when things were better. But the next group might not have the same attitude. And you always have to wonder about team chemistry from year to year. I think it'll be great this year. But after that, I don't know. And you have this influx of transfers. June is a monstrous month. Caleb, you pointed it out yesterday. I wrote the column about it. It's on offthehooksports.com. You have got to win some Junes. And it starts right now. Because you have got to be ready now for the 2025 season. That's what you're thinking in recruiting. I don't think Tennessee got a major haul of elite contributors that are going to be ready this upcoming season. So, and I'm not just talking about the 2023 class. I'm talking 2022 as well. You got to up it. And Caleb, you can go in and you can recruit guys early and you can make project players and all that. And that sounds good. And that works at UCF. But you got to go toe to toe and tell Nick Saban or Kirby Smart, I'm here to battle you. And I don't have to win every battle, but in particular with the area around Atlanta, you win 2 or 3 this year, then it could lead to a pipeline or at least a trickle of prospects coming out of the Atlanta area. And that is when Tennessee will be, air quotes, back.
I agree with everything you said. This is the most important June of Josh Heupel's tenure at Tennessee. It's the most important month, maybe, of his entire tenure at Tennessee. It will define the program because I'll go out and straight up say it. It's not sustainable. Relying on the transfer portal. There have been reports that the market for NIL is stabilizing. I think it was the Wild West. A lot of businesses started throwing money, but what they're going to learn really fast, and you know this, Dave. We just talked about last segment throwing money at basketball players versus football. Football's a lot harder to project than basketball. So throwing money at these transfers or anything like that, it's really hard to know exactly if they're going to fit in, and they can't just keep doing that. So at some point, Josh Heupel's going to have to go the old school way of getting commitments, elite commitments. He has got Tennessee at a place right now, riding a wave of momentum after last year's 11-2 season to do that. Now, here's how this all plays out. 2023 is still going to be reliant on transfer portal players and Jeremy Pruitt recruits, give or take a couple of spots. He needs to be successful in 2023, and he needs another transfer portal haul in the 2023 to 2024 season. But he needs a loaded 2024 recruiting class. So that way, by 2025, he's ready to go. Recruiting class a year. If it's an elite recruiting class, you give it a year before it really takes over the program. And so 2025 will be the first year he's going to have to rely on his recruits. That means the 2024 class has got to be loaded, and the most important month in recruiting season now is June, bar none.
Totally agree. So Tennessee right now has the Merklinger quarterback, Jake, out of Savannah, Georgia, which is great. I mean, you always want your next quarterback, but I think out of the Atlanta area would be very significant. And then they've got Jeremiah Hurd, who's a 3-star guy. No offense against Jeremiah, that's not the type of guy I'm talking about. He's out of Rome, Georgia. I think you got to go out and I don't think Tennessee's ready at this point to do the major haul when they got Cozy Coleman, Jamal Lewis, and Deion Grant, which would have been 90. It would have been 96. They got those 4 guys. Yeah, right. Okay, so, but what you can hope for, I don't think you're ready to hope for that yet. But what you can hope for is the class before that. That just happened to be the number 1 class in the nation. But that had the Jeff Colemans of the world, the guys that did provide that pipeline into other states, Fred White's of the world. That's what you're hoping for. And then next year's your gangbuster class. But listen, guys, I'm going to tell you right now, Tennessee was 10th in recruiting, which sounds good. And Butch Jones would tell you that is he's a champion in life already. Give him the trophy. But that's 6th when you include Texas and Oklahoma in the SEC. That's 6th. That's behind Alabama, Georgia, LSU, Texas, and Oklahoma. That ain't getting it done. Tennessee will need to be pressing right up against that top 5. And if you're saying, Dave, 10 and 5, that's not that big of a difference. I covered recruiting for 20 years. It is a huge difference. It's the difference between a couple more 4-stars or maybe one more 5-star. And if Tennessee isn't able to do that this year, this month, then I've got concerns moving forward because you're right. They have all the momentum. Nobody's harping on the South Carolina game now. They're harping on the fact that Tennessee was number 1 in 110 games. It was fantastic. Caleb, that's where Tennessee needs to be. They need to get that. I'm not saying the number 1 class in the nation. They need to get some of those cats where they go toe-to-toe, eye-to-eye with Kirby Smart, and they win those battles. They say, we can win, and then they don't have to evaluate guys early and hope they continue to develop as prospects, which is what they've done at this point.
Yes, and if they don't do that this month, that is when we are going to look back on that South Carolina game. Because I can tell you right now, Tennessee, that South Carolina game costs Tennessee 3 recruits right now, who, if they had those 3 recruits, it'd be a top 5 class easily. Not even a question. And so that game was going to, if they don't have the momentum, do what they need to do in June, that South Carolina game will prove way more costly than just not making a college football playoff in 2022. I can tell you guys that right now. Another important point on this is that I think that talent evaluation we aren't sure of with Josh Heupel, but I will give him credit with Jeremiah Hurd because you mentioned him. Hurd didn't play football till 8th. He played football in 8th grade, didn't play again until last year. That's why his rating was so low. And Heupel and Tennessee were the first to offer him before anybody.
And I'm still down with those guys. Don't get me wrong. Okay, I'm down with getting those guys, but at some point, you don't need the good backstory. You don't need the might develop into something special. I mean, there's a difference, but let's just put it this way. There's a difference between, I'm not singling anybody out, but the linemen they have taken recently, in particular the defensive lineman, and a Cade Mays, who walks in the door, a 5-star prospect, 6'6", 335 pounds, and is probably ready to play from day one. We're talking about a whole different cat, right?
So basically what you're saying is Tennessee needs to start getting the guys that any idiot off the street could start from day one. If somebody who's never watched football would know they could play football.
It's the off the hook. It's our own rating system. It's anywhere, somewhere, and nowhere. They need the anywhere guys. Hurd's a somewhere guy. Alabama or Georgia, would they take Hurd? I don't know. Probably not.
So my question then becomes, what about how much of recruiting can sometimes be just out evaluating other coaches? Because we're giving Heupel credit. We're giving Pruitt credit for this assembled talent for Heupel. Pruitt never really, he had one fringe top 10 class at Tennessee, but he just evaluated the talent so well. Is that sustainable long-term, or do you all, or is it one of those things where you're going to have to win over the obvious guys?
I think you definitely should evaluate some guys at a higher level and have those guys in your class that you point to that said, Georgia, Alabama didn't care about him, but we knew he would be great. Jamal Lewis was that guy, as we discovered during our Celebrate 98 series. That sounds crazy now, but Georgia wasn't high on Jamal Lewis. So Tennessee was. I know it sounds crazy in retrospect, right?
Yes, but also, again, that was Ray Goff.
I agree, but Kirby Smart, everybody makes mistakes. So you've got to take advantage of those mistakes. So I'm not discounting early recruiting. I'm not discounting being a better talent evaluator, but you've got to win a third of your battles on head-to-head 4-star guys against Georgia, right? Right?
Yeah,
Now, Travis says I disagree. We aren't a prototypical team. Okay, and I'm glad you brought that point up, Travis, because Tennessee has several advantages. They have, I think, a real offensive guru / wizard as its head coach. That's huge. They have NIL, which is huge. But if you want to take the next step and be elite, I think they've got to beat Georgia from time to time and Alabama for some of the top guys.
Yes, this isn't the 90s where Spurrier could just get a bunch of track stars in his backyard and be an offensive genius and out-scheme everybody. That doesn't happen in the SEC anymore. And so he's going to actually have to actively go out and get some talent. And again, also that was happening in the 90s when nobody else had – everybody ran 2 cornerbacks and a slow safety, so it was easy to run his offense. So yes, Josh Heupel is an offensive wizard. I fully agree on that. But you do have to get a certain level of talent to run that philosophy. Again, one, you need fast receivers. Now, he's got a pretty good pipeline of receivers coming in and out. But you also have to have good interior blocking because Heupel's offense doesn't work if the run game is not a legitimate threat. It just doesn't. This isn't Mike Leach in the air raid.
No, I agree. And a question on the message board, I wasn't referring specifically to Cade Mays and his size, but I'm Darnell Wright, they got up to that size. They turned him into that sort of player. So it's not an issue of being too big or too small. Now, you certainly don't want the guy that, I don't even remember his name, that Butch got, another Butch reference, Lyle, that you don't want the guy that they got out of Florida. Do you remember him that was like 248 pounds, an offensive tackle? I mean, he was horrible. And a question, he wasn't going to play. And a question about Peyton Lewis. Peyton had interest from Alabama, Auburn, Boston College, Cincinnati. That might end up being a great get where Tennessee was ahead of the curve. But I think Alabama and Auburn were certainly interested. Is that a huge win? No, but it's a significant win. That's certainly a step in the right direction. I got no issue with that whatsoever. It's today's tough question. Where does Tennessee need to be in recruiting for June to be a great month?
Today's tough question. Take a side. Take a stand. The Dave Hooker Show, a presentation of OffTheHookSports.com.
Okay, recruiting rankings are stupid, but it's what we got. And the simple fact is how successful an individual website is covering a program will affect their recruiting stature. You get an extra star if you go to this school because they've got a big site on a network. That's just the way things go. I'm not calling anybody out. You can decide for yourself. That's why I like the 247 composite. So when I look at that composite, I think it's the closest we've got to a thermometer of the temperature. And I'm going to say that Tennessee needs to be a top 5 school in recruiting to compete for championships each and every year. I do not think that's a reach whatsoever. Is that too strong, Caleb Callahan?
Every year, I think that might be a little too strong. I don't even think they were top 5 class every year in the 90s. The 95 class that Fred White was part of wasn't even top 10, funny enough. I think 2 top 5 classes, 3 top 10 classes, and 4 top 12 classes. But 1 can be out of the top 10 and 1 can be out of the top 5. But you need a minimum of 2 top 5.
Well, I was specifically talking about this upcoming class.
Oh, this class. This class has to be top 5. This class needs to be top 5. Yes, it's because they haven't had one yet. And as you've pointed out, with Tennessee and the politicking of recruiting rankings, when Tennessee has a top 5 class, it's probably about a top 7 class. their top 8 class. So they had the number 10 class last year. That probably means they had the number 12 class, honestly. And Tennessee needs to have a top 5 class. I think the most important thing is they need to make sure they're top 10 in every recruiting service. So people tout 247 composite last year for top 10, but they weren't top 10 on Rivals. Now, I don't know how people feel about Rivals with On3 emerging now. I don't know if they're as credible as they used to be. You probably know more about that than I do. But
unfortunately,
I've heard that I know On3 seemed to poach a lot of the Rivals recruiting analysts when they came on board. So I don't know which side is in better shape between the two. But Tennessee wasn't top 10 on Rivals. And
I actually go composite, and then this might surprise you, but when it comes to the elite guys, not all 500 prospects, but the elite guys, I like ESPN's crew. But they just don't have the manpower to be able to judge 500 guys. So when they talk about their top 300, I do think they hit that pretty much with a nail on the head. Now, let's take a look at Tennessee's 865 Live recruiting weekend that happened over this past weekend. And we know that Tennessee picked up Peyton Lewis as a commitment, but that was going to happen on Saturday. So what did Tennessee actually accomplish? Well, I think they would have loved to get a commitment from Boo Carter out of Brainerd. We've talked a lot about him, a 4-star athlete prospect. Here's what I'm hearing, that he'll end up at Tennessee, but this whole Colorado thing with Deion Sanders certainly has his attention. So I'm not ruling that out at all. I think he could end up at Colorado, but if I had to make a bet, I feel 60-40 Tennessee, and Colorado certainly in that 40%. He's kind of a weird bird. He switched high schools. He seems to flirt with Tennessee a lot, but does he love Tennessee? I don't know. I guess he's going to end up telling us, but don't be surprised if that takes until the early signing period in December.
Yeah, and this also is missing out on Boo Carter is not as big of a gut punch, but when you combine it with missing out on Walter Nolan a couple of years ago, that's going to be a big red flag for Josh Heupel if that happens. Now, I'm not going to put that on Josh Heupel too much. I got to say this. The NIL collective for Tennessee needs to get a little bit smarter about how they spend their money. I'm not saying that it's bad to throw $8 million at Nico Iamaleava, but I am saying you don't spend all your money there and let Walter Nolan get out of Knoxville. Because quite honestly, I think he went to Texas A&M because Texas A&M had more NIL money. I have no problem saying that up front out loud right here, even though that's technically against the rules. And
no, I think you're right.
Yeah. And if you're Tennessee, you don't let Texas A&M outbid you for Walter Nolan. You can't let Colorado outbid you for Boo Carter. I don't know what Colorado's NIL initiative is right now. I know Deion Sanders selling the glam probably has some advertisers wanting to get involved. So I'm intrigued by that. But to the NIL collective, to Spire Sports, don't let these defensive stars get out of East Tennessee. Throw your money at them. Josh Heupel needs them.
Yep, I agree. This list is brought to you by Craft Treats. Go to crafttreats.com, use the promo code off the hook, and you will get 20% off your purchase. Don't forget about the Chill Pills that has the CBD dog treats, will help with your pet's digestive issues, arthritis, and also anxiety. It's pretty awesome, the Chill Pills, but they've got non-CBD as well. Use the promo code off the hook, get 20% off. So the guy that everybody wants to hear about, and you're not going to have anything definitive on him anytime soon, is 5-star linebacker Sammy Brown, 6'2", 230 pounds, out of Jefferson High School. I think Tennessee has a shot, but ultimately it would be hard for me not to pick Georgia. Feel free to jump in if you got any thoughts on these as I run through them.
I actually think I think Clemson's in the lead for Brown, so I think Tennessee should go all in, if anything, to make sure he doesn't end up at Clemson. For those who don't know, Clemson's a bigger threat. Clemson's success is a bigger threat to Tennessee than Georgia long term. Georgia's going to be Georgia. They're that good. But if Clemson's good, that ices out another recruiting area for Tennessee.
Great point. Wide receiver Freddie DeBose out of Smithson Valley in Spring Branch, Texas, coming off a torn ACL. This is one of those project guys. You know, you got an in on maybe an elite athlete because he had the ACL injury. Still a 4-star prospect. Tight end Amir Jackson, 4-star tight end from Portal, Georgia high school, not the portal. He has already said he would return for a visit to Tennessee. I think Tennessee has a great shot at him. Florida and Miami are in it. Georgia, not so sure. Josh Petty, offensive tackle. Now, this is a 2025 prospect, 4-star offensive tackle out of Roswell, Georgia. This is the type of cat I'm talking about. Already interest from Auburn, and we know Hugh Freeze can recruit that area well. This is the type of cat I'm talking about because Georgia is going to come calling. He's a 2025. Tennessee's trying to get in early. This is the type of cat I'm talking about. So when Georgia comes down the line and they say, we're still Georgia, this is your home state, let's play ball, Tennessee can say, we're on you first, and we've got other 4-star guys already in your class. Caleb Calhoun's distant cousin, Daniel Calhoun, an offensive tackle from Marietta, Georgia, 6'6", 355 pounds, heavily pursued by Georgia, Texas, Alabama, and Auburn. This is the cat, other than Sammy Brown, that I'm talking about, that you got to get out of Georgia eventually. That's the type of cat. Aiden
You're not
Breland.
getting him. Sorry.
No,
you're not getting Daniel Calhoun.
No, you're
also,
not.
355 ain't no way.
Do you have an insight since he's your cousin?
I do not have an insight, but looking at his size, if you were a 355-pound lineman, would you rather play in Georgia's offense or Tennessee's offense? You'd rather play in Georgia's offense.
Right. That's the type of cat you want, whether it's this year, next year, another dude, or this dude. Aiden Breland is out of Santa Ana, California, 6'5", 290 pounds, 4-star defensive lineman. This is the guy where you flex your muscle because, hey, I'm Tennessee, and I've got the recruiting budget to go out to California and pull cats. And Nico certainly helps you.
And Nico's from Modern Day, isn't he?
He was from Polytech, and then he went to Riverside.
I thought Tennessee had somebody on their team from Modern Day, but
they had the way back the late Polynesian defensive end.
Jesse Mahalona. Oh, Brew McCoy. Brew McCoy went to Modern Day.
Yeah, okay. Brew McCoy. That's right. There you go.
Defensive now.
Yeah. Defensive lineman Amari Adams, been to Tennessee several times. I think the Vols could very well end up with him, a 4-star prospect, beginning we're talking about 2025. Cameron Fountain.
And they got to get him out of South Carolina, and that South Carolina loss, that's where that weighs heavily on you.
Agreed. Cameron Fountain of Youth, an edge rusher. He is 6'5", 237 pounds. I think there's a great relationship with defensive line coach Rodney Garner. That should help Tennessee. And I think they can get him. Athlete Cameron Michael. Man, it's another tough pull from Georgia. So he's from Statesboro, Georgia high school. And I think he's going to take his time. Again, it's the type of cat you got to beat Georgia for every once in a while. And
Would
then
you rather play defensive back for Georgia or Tennessee?
I wouldn't want to play defense at all for Tennessee, to be real honest with you, unless I'm an edge rusher. Man, I'm down with that because I'm going to pad my sack stats. And nothing's more important than sack stats. Defensive back DeMello Jones, probably the longest shot of the group that was in town last weekend. A 4-star prospect has been committed to Georgia. So there you go. That's a complete breakdown. The visitors want to be sure and thank Caleb Giroux, who's killing it on offthehooksports.com. He couldn't join us today, but he is absolutely slaying it in recruiting. So, and we're free, advertiser base. So how about that? So, yeah, Tennessee had some cats in there that they want to land that would be those sort of game-changing type of prospects, and they bundled them with Peyton Lewis, who they knew was going to commit, Merklinger. It was a very what I would call, as far as a recruiting weekend. And again, I've done this for 20 years, so I can tell from a mile away. It was very focused on the guys that I mentioned, the 4-star guys, because you have a good family feel in guys that are already committed. They can then recruit those players as prospects. That's what this was all about. This weekend was all about landing one or two of those guys that we just talked about that Tennessee has to have to turn the program into an annual championship contender.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. That's exactly what this was about. And they need to be able to get a couple of them. It hurts them that the NCAA investigation still hasn't ended, by the way. I don't know if, I know, totally forgot about that, right? But I will say that, I mean, at this point, just for the sake of recruiting, Dave, with June here, isn't it worth the scholarship reductions that you might get? Just accept it, because I'd rather have the scholarship reductions than get hampered in June recruiting.
I don't know. That seems kind of rough. I'm not going to take it if I didn't do anything wrong.